Hello and welcome to Limit Break 20. Today, we're going to be diving into skill checks and how they work in Final Fantasy XIV Tabletop RPG. So, the first thing that we want to do is identify exactly what a skill check is. So, in tabletop role playing games, players are going to be presented with different situations and problems, and it's up to them to come up with the solutions. Now, as someone who has spent years being a dungeon master, I can tell you that players are going to come up with some off the wall solutions, and they should. That's what makes these games fun and entertaining, and it's one of the best parts about tabletop RPGs. One of my earliest memories with kind of skill checks and sort of the impact that they have was really in my first tabletop RPG session where my buddy Scott basically had said, listen, this is your guys' adventure. I'm just here to facilitate it. And what that did is that gave me and all our players sort of a sense of agency that we could do anything that we wanted to. We were just going to have to roll dice to figure out exactly what those outcomes were going to be. So, in addition to being a DM and having these experiences, I also really enjoy the role playing aspect of these games. And it really pains me to say that there isn't a lot of guidance in the Game Master's handbook or even the player's handbook. In fact, I'm going to read you the paragraph that the player's handbook has in regards to what exactly a skill check is. And then finally, what I'll do is I'll go over the different skill checks that exist in other tabletop RPGs and give you a quick list on how these translate. Okay, so what you're going to see on screen right now is an actual text from the player's guide that talks about making skill checks. So what it says here is when a character takes an action where the outcome is uncertain or is dependent on the skill with which the action is performed, the player controlling that character rolls a d20 to determine success or failure. Follow these three steps when making a check. Determine the type of check required and assign a challenge rating. Roll a d20 and apply any relevant modifiers. Determine the success or failure of the action. So I do want to highlight a couple of different things. After that short paragraph that doesn't really give you any information about skill checks, what they then do is present to you a CR or a challenge rating table. And what they put on there is that 25 and 30s are nearly impossible. Just from my experience, 25 and 30s are extremely rare and should only be used in extremely dire circumstances or almost nearly impossible circumstances. Based on the stats in the starter guide, I would just have 20 be sort of the close to the best possible outcome. So if players roll over a 20 or get close to a 20, that should sort of be kind of the baseline for success and difficulty. Now, I want to touch base on something that is very, very decisive in the skill check community for tabletop RPGs, and that is critical successes and critical failures. I am a huge fan of critical failures. And the reason being is because they are absolutely hilarious and they create probably the most fun at the table. I know that that's going to, people who maybe have played Baldur's Gate 3 or, have an understanding of what that's like. But rules as written in Dungeons and Dragons, and I believe in Pathfinder as well, skill checks are going to be based, even if you roll one, if you have a high proficiency, you still might be able to pull something off. That's okay. But again, natural ones create so much fun at a table that I would hate for any party not to roll a one and just not have to wait for the GM to decide what sort of off the wall thing happens. So that's just my opinion. And then if someone rolls a natural 20, just sort of use the rule cool. Whatever happens, have them do it in an awesome way or have whatever they're trying to do kind of go off without a hitch and just be a really cool, memorable moment for the party. I think you'll find that that's just good DMing at that point or game mastering at that point. So the other thing I want to talk about is a concept that's called penalties. And this is different from other tabletop RPGs. And this is something I'm actually a big fan of. So I'll give you a situation. Let's say your players are in a situation where they're completely outnumbered and the warrior decides to make a threat to him and says, I'm going to take you all down, right? Well, clearly he's making a threat when he's not really in a position of power. He's at a disadvantage. In a lot of tabletop RPGs, they'll tell you, go ahead and roll with disadvantage. If they say something or do something that maybe puts them off or not in an advantageous situation, you're going to roll 2 dice and take the lower of. Now, what I love about Final Fantasy XIV's tabletop RPG is that they use a penalty system. So some characters might be affected with an ailment or an enfeeblement that's going to reduce some of their checks by a flat amount. So, for example, in that same situation, what you would say, okay, go ahead and make that intimidation check, but you're going to have a -3 penalty. So that means whatever they roll, they take a -3 off the top. I like this a lot because it's in some ways less punishing. Actually, I think in almost all ways, it's less punishing than just saying roll another dice and take the lower of, right? Because even if someone rolls a 19 and it's like, ooh, that was a really good thing, you could still -3 and get a 16, and there still might be a chance that there's a positive outcome. When you roll at disadvantage, strong possibility you're not getting that off. But it is cool when you do. So I'll put it in a little caveat there. And then something that is sort of a staple in most tabletop RPGs is something called advantage. And let's say the situation's reversed. So the party has sort of neutralized an encounter, and there's one person left, and the warrior says, I'm going to take my axe and I'm going to, hit you over the head as hard as I can with it if you don't tell me what I want to know. Well, the enemy's outnumbered, he's been defeated. So then you would say, hey, go ahead and roll with advantage. So in that case, you would roll 2d20s and take the higher of the two. Okay. That's not something that's necessarily new to tabletop RPGs, but that would be a situation in which advantage might be warranted. So the next thing I'm going to cover are going to be the 5 primary attributes that exist. And then there's going to be one passive attribute, which I'll kind of touch base on, and I'll tell you why I don't love it. So the first thing that we're going to do is go over strength. Now, strength represents your adventurer's athleticism, physical fitness, and raw power that they can bring to bear. This would be a situation where, the warrior, there's a portcullis, and he says, I want to try to lift it up so the party can escape. You would then say, okay, go ahead and make a strength check for me. Your warrior is going to roll his d20, add his strength modifier, and that's going to be his roll. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Next, we're going to move into dexterity, and that's sort of at the opposite end of the physical spectrum. And what that I mean by that is that's going to be your coordination, your agility, your reflexes, quick twitch, balance, that type of stuff. So let's say you have a player who didn't notice a trap, and now a big piece of the ceiling is going to fall and crush on top of him. What you would say is, go ahead and make a dexterity check for me. So he's going to roll his d20, add his dexterity modifier, and that's going to be the number that he has to either succeed or fail that check. Moving on, we then have vitality. And this is going to be your adventurer's sort of constitution, their hardiness, physical health, and endurance. So let's say a NPC or an evil player tricks the players and poisons them. They would then make a vitality check to see how does that poison resonate to them. Are they able to fight it off and continue to do what they need to do? So that would be a situation where you'd make a vitality check. Next, we move into intelligence, and this just represents your adventurer's sort of sharpness of mind, their ability to recall information, and use reasoning skills. And so this is important to sort of denote because, or to note, I don't think anyone denotes it, but to note because when you have the final attribute, which is mind, these can maybe get sort of transposed. And mind represents your adventure's perceptiveness, their instincts, and intuition. So and actually, when you go through the level 30 scenario, there's a situation where you investigate a crime scene and they ask for an intelligence check, and then you sort of investigate a trail with a mind check. And if you're a new game master, that might be confusing. Or if players say they want to do one investigation, or you're using intelligence, you're using mind. But don't worry, we're going to actually sort of streamline and simplify this all for you guys when we get to the cheat sheet. But before we get there, I want to talk about the sort of weird passive ability called Vigilance. And what this is this is a passive attribute that represents how aware your adventurer is to their surroundings at any given time. Now, what I don't like about this is in the adventure, that at least the ones I've read through, is that they say, here's the vigilance check, and if your player doesn't notice it, then X, Y, and Z happens. Well, even like the level 30 adventure, the vigilance check is the lowest character's vigilance. And so they're always going to pass this check. And so it's this weird passive where some characters notice it because the dragoon has a higher vigilance than the warrior, or vice versa. I don't know if that's true. I'm not looking at the stat sheets right now. But that's just the thing that I felt was a little off. It's like, why does this person not know their surroundings because of the character that they chose? So again, I have a fix for this, and that's exactly why this channel exists. So now here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through the sort of what I call the skill check quick list here. And again, there's going to be a PDF in this so you guys can download it, print it out, do whatever you want to do with it. And I want to say this. These are just rules of thumb, and these are what I felt just from my experience running games and other tabletop RPGs and how it sort of translates. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is that there is a list of skills that characters can be good at, and it actually spells out what characters can and can't do in a good way, right? And so if you are new to tabletop RPGs, having something like this to even give to your characters and say, hey, here are some of the skills that I might call upon on based on what you want to do. So your players have an understanding of, oh, these are all things that I can do. You'd be surprised at when you give people a list of things that they can do, instead of just asking them to be open-ended, what they might be able to do, right? So with that, let's dive right into it. So acrobatics, going back to my example about the trap with the ceiling coming down and getting ready to crush the player character, that's a dexterity check, right? Just kind of makes sense. Next, we're going to look at animal handling. And I think an example of this would be, there's a runaway chocobo carriage and you neutralize the threat, but the chocobos are sort of unwieldy and kind of running towards a cliff. You would then, if the player says, hey, I want to try to stop these chocobos, perfect. Make an animal handling check for me. And that's going to use your mind stat. Okay. It might just be called a chocobo handling. I mean, maybe we should just switch it to that. That would be more thematic, I think. Moving on, we're going to do athletics. And this is going to be that warrior who wants to open the portcullis for his other party to escape. That's just going to be a strength check. Makes sense. It's how athletic are you? How strong are you? Are you able to do those things? Next, we're moving into deception. Now, I will tell you this. Your players are going to want to lie through their teeth. And if they don't, you will have at least one character who wants to lie through their teeth, regardless of how good the party is, right? So, for example, players are looking around a room, there's no guards, or whoever's occupying the room has stepped out. You see the important note that you need to take, you pocket it, they come back in and say, where's the note? Well, your player characters aren't going to be like, yeah, it's in my pocket, right? They're going to lie, and they're going to say, I don't know, what note? That's when you would make a deception check. And for that, you're going to use the mind stat. Then we move into history. So if a player character wants to recall some lore about Eorzea, or maybe the world, or one of the city-states, have it be an intelligence check. Pretty straightforward. Next is one of my favorite checks to make when it comes to role playing, and that's going to be insight. I especially like doing this as a character when I play these tabletop games. And what insight determines is, can you tell if someone's being truthful or not? Right. So, for example, an NPC might say something, and if the character wants to figure out if they believe them, they'd say, "Hey, I'd like to make an insight check." And that stat uses your mind. If they roll high, they maybe discern, yes, you can tell from what this character's saying that his eyes are darting away, and you can tell that he's not being honest with you, right? Or if they roll low, you can't tell anything, right? But at least you give the players a shot to determine that. Next is kind of a unique one. This is something I've always felt should go into two different attributes to be able to pull the skill check off. It's going to be intimidation. So, going back to the warrior who says, you're outnumbered, and if you don't tell me what I want to know, I'm going to bash your head in with my axe, right? That would be a strength check, in my opinion. You're using a show of brute physical force to hurt somebody, right? Now, if, let's say, the black mage says, listen, the jig's up, you're completely outnumbered, tell us what we want to know, and we'll make sure that your sentence is reasonable, and we'll put in a good word for you and say you were cooperative. Well, you might be intimidating them. That almost might be persuasion. But let's just say you say, hey, you're outnumbered, there's no way you can win this fight, it's going to cost you your life if you don't. You're intimidating them, right? There's more of us than you. You're using a sound argument. That would probably be intelligence. Then we move into investigation, right? Players come into a room, they want to investigate the scene of the crime or investigate if they can find something. Just going to be an intelligence check. D20, add the intelligence. Next is going to be medicine. This could be something to where players maybe find an NPC who's wounded and they want to try to stabilize him. They would make a medicine check. Now, to be fair, you probably have a white mage in the party, so they could probably just cure him. But hey, this at least gives you a way to role play with maybe something that's not curable, or maybe it's some type of cryptic miasma that's preventing the white mage from being able to cure him, and you have to figure out what it is. Make a medicine check. Then we move into nature. So let's say the adventurers are out exploring and they want to figure out, okay, which way is the trail that leads back to Udal, right? Well, then maybe they make a nature check to figure out if they can find the right path. You would use intelligence for that. Now, this one, I'm going to reserve the right to change this because the full player's book isn't out yet. And the reason I use this particular stat for this particular skill check is because it's probably the most called upon skill check in tabletop RPGs, and that's going to be perception. A lot of times players will say, well, what do I notice about this room? Or is there anything unusual? The game master is going to say, make a perception check. And so with that being the most commonly used check in most tabletop RPGs, I had the stat be dexterity. And the reason being, at the time when I was developing this, it was before the Bard was released, which just came in a couple of weeks ago. So we are going to have a video on that. But with the perception check, dexterity was the only stat that was sort of mid for all the characters in the character sheet. And what I didn't want to do with perception is make it mine, because then what you have is you have the white mage who's super perceptive and looking at everything, but the warrior or the dragoon aren't. They're just going to be not noticing anything and oblivious to things. And I didn't feel like that was fair from a party composition. And if adventurers are powerful and they have these different experiences, why wouldn't we create something that gives everyone sort of a fair shot at trying to pull off these checks and not just make some vastly better than others? Next, this one, I can go either way. I just wanted to add another to strength to be, to kind of play it out, but it's performance, right? Maybe you're trying to put on a big show or, kind of show how powerful you are to the townsfolk. You're using strength. Again, I don't die on that hill. If you feel like you want to change it, go for it. Next is going to be persuasion, and for that one is mind. Persuasion is going to be, hey, tell us a little bit about what we want to know, and maybe we can help you out as well, because we might be looking for the same person, and there's going to be some ways that we can synergize. You're going to make a persuasion check. I felt like having deception and persuasion be sort of the same stat made a little bit of sense, so keeping continuity there was important. And then it's religion, right? So let's say you have some beastman tribe that's trying to summon a primal, right? Okay, what primal are we trying to look at? We'll make a religion check for me for that. That's going to be intelligence. And then next is going to be sleight of hand. So again, going back to your characters who like to lie, characters are going to want to try to steal stuff. They're going to want to try to grab things off guards. They're going to want to try to grab things in front of NPCs. That's what sleight of hand is for. And so with that, you would just make a dexterity check. Kind of makes sense. Next is one that I was a little disappointed there wasn't any set mechanics in any of the guides in the starter's guide, or even the free materials online, and that's stealth. Players really, really like being stealthy, right? If you're talking about this cave and you've seen shady characters go into there and you're like, ooh, what's in there? They're not just going to be splashing around. They're going to say, hey, we're going to try to go in quiet. We want to try to move slowly. Perfect. Make a stealth check for me, right? And you might have some players be good at that, and someone rolls really low, and hey, they're going to get noticed, right? So that's going to be a dexterity check. And then the last one that we have here is survival. And for that one, we're going to do strength. And the reason being is because I want to give a little bit of love to characters who are strong in the role play mechanics of it. So let's say you guys are out in the middle of nowhere and you're trying to find your way back. Sure, you can make a nature check, but maybe your warrior or your dragoon says, hey, can I make a survival check to see if I notice any tracks that might lead us out of where we're at? Perfect. Make a strength check. So that's it, guys. That's sort of the list. I think if you have this, give this to your players, keep it for yourself. And this way you can kind of reference it. So if your players tell you, hey, I want to do something, you've just got a quick sheet that says, hey, go ahead and try to make a persuasion check with you using your mind stat. right? That I think is effectively what this is for, just to give you guys just a way to sort of enhance the role play, because that's the funnest part of tabletop RPGs. Final Fantasy XIV's got combat figured out. We'll go over that in a later video too. But the role play mechanic with the skill checks, I think where it needed a little bit of love. That's why I felt like this video was important. And with that, I want to say thank you again for joining me on today's video with skill checks. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to attune to this channel by liking and subscribing. And don't forget to hit the notification bell for more Limit Break 20 content. Also, leave me a comment telling me what you'd like to see me cover in the next channel. Otherwise, I'm going to keep doing the stuff that I think is important. And if it sucks, somebody's got to tell me, and that needs to be you. Anyways, thanks for watching. And until next time, stay safe, adventurers.